Actually, one of the things that I wanted to do was, I know that apparently now only a few of you have actually seen the, I guess now famous washing machine sort of model. Christopher wanted me to talk a little bit about thinking mind, awareness, and some other things sort of light outside of that. So I decided that I was going to sort of construct it in terms of the notion of dreaming. And what I want to do is I want to kind of equate thinking mind with the dream state. And I want to explore the possibility of moving from the dream state to the waking state. All right. So in the process of this, I'm going to share with you this model that I've constructed in terms of this sort of creation of the thinking mind. There are a few passages or sort of quotes I want to read that I stole from Osho here. I like to claim them, but he says the dreaming mind cannot see the truth. A dreaming mind will convert the truth also into a lie. Now I want to ask the question, what is the difference between the dream and reality, between the dream state and the waking state? So I'm just going to introduce some of these questions, and then I'm going to proceed with this, and then I'm going to come back to them. In the dream state, when you're dreaming, for example, are you aware that you're dreaming? Can you think about what is real, unreal, possible, or impossible, reasonable or unreasonable in the dream state? For example, if you find yourself in this dream state, maybe you're being chased by a two-headed lion. Do we have this moment when we're in the dream state where we say, wait a minute! That's impossible! There aren't two-headed lions! Doubt. Is there doubt in the dream state? Is there critical analysis in the dream state? We say, wait a minute, that's not possible. That can't be. And in the dream state, the question is, how do we know that we're dreaming until we awaken? I shared with Christopher last night. I'm sharing this with you because it's ready to hand. I had this dream, I guess now the night before last. And I woke up, and in my dream was that my wallet that I keep in my girl purse, that people have come to call it, so I'm going to go with that, wasn't in there. So in the dream, I'm looking in it, and my wallet's not there. And then I wake up. And I'm lying there in bed, and I'm thinking, is it really not there? And so I get up, I put my shoes on. I'm still in my underwear. I jump out of bed, put my shoes on, and I run out to my vehicle, because that's where I keep it, to check and see if my wallet was in my girl bag. And it was. I'm going to come back to that. All right? Now, what I want to do is to kind of look at this model. All right? We're talking about awareness and thinking mind. So, as the model works, it would be something like this. All right? If I think about, I'm going to just denote this as an A. It stands for awareness. But what I mean by this is indiscriminate awareness. Here we're talking about simply sensation. Seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling. Now, I'm not seeing anything. I'm not hearing anything. Right? We'll have to construct that. That's a mental construction, right? Later on, we will chop it up or we'll divide it up in terms of seeing a dog, seeing a cat. Hearing, we could divide up in terms of hearing. That's the sound of a train whistle blowing. That's the sound of a dog barking, right? But so indiscriminate sound can be divided up into discriminate discriminate kinds of things, which is really what we do when we think the world, right? So if you think about awareness, kind of in terms of the model of something like water, and if I ask you the question, what is the shape of water? It's kind of peculiar in a way, right? What is the shape of water? Well, it's kind of like puzzling for a moment. So we think, all right, well, water is it's kind of shapeless in the sense that it doesn't have any definitive kind of shape, right? It's not committed to any kind of shape, so it's free to be any shape. It can take on any form. So indiscriminate mind, right, can be seen as, indiscriminate mind, or thinking mind, right, this is like water, it can take on any form. Just as when you take water and you pour it into any shaped container, it can take on that shape or that form. All right? So in a sense, in a general term, if we will talk about this mind, but here I'm talking about mind as kind of awareness. So we can compact this, we can containerize it. So thinking mind can simply be seen as contracted awareness. All right? It's containerized. And in the process of this sort of, all right, I have this, all right, I'm looking at it in these terms simply because we, in the Western sort of mind, tend to think of this awareness as in our head kind of thing. So we won't put the rest of the body, right? So when we think about, okay, so we say, all right, we have this capacity. Why do we think? We ask the question, why do we think? The easy answer is we think because we can. If we didn't have the capacity, we wouldn't think, probably. I'm not sure if frogs think or whatever. Some of the biologists might sort of want to disagree or whatever. But I'm thinking that if they had the capacity, they probably would be thinkers. And so we'd have great thinking frogs and great artistic frogs and so forth and so on. But insofar as they don't have this capacity, I'm not sure whether or not they're thinkers. But we're thinkers. Why are we thinkers? Because we have this capacity to do it. All right? So in a sense that we can represent or represent or construct or notate the world in terms of mental constructions. So if then we say, all right, mind says, look, I can create this world for you. But there are certain conditions that you must abide by. I sometimes compare it to a computer, right? It's like, okay, think of the things that a computer can do. Lots of things, extraordinary things, right? But there are certain kinds of limitations. You must be able to process the information in the way that it can take it in and do something with it. So my example sometimes is this. If you were taking an exam, and you've probably taken these exams where you color in the bubbles or the marks or whatever, A, B, C, D or whatever, all right? That kind of thing. Well, let's suppose that as long as you then conform to what the thing can read, right, then it can process this for you. But let's suppose you know the answer to it, or maybe you think the question is a little bit vague. So instead, you don't color in anything, but you write in the margin. And what you write in the margin is exactly correct. But it comes out wrong, in a sense, because it can't compute the information in this form. So, in that sense, the mind say, look, we can make a world for you. We can construct a world, but here are the conditions. All right? These are the rules. So, in a sense, we might call these rules of thought, or sometimes axioms. All right? There are some fundamental thing that must be the case. One, all right, we say, we need identity. All right, we need a way to tell one thing from another. You could give it any kind of name. You could call it A, or you could call it a dog, all right, or you could call it a cat, or whatever. So whatever you decide to call it, all right. So we say, identity simply says a thing is what we call it, or a thing is identical to itself. So sometimes we construct this. It's like A is A, all right. But what we've done here is we've cut the world into two. Because to think the world, you got to two it. You got to cut it into two. Right? So when we say, all right, that gives us this. We have the law of excluded middle term. They don't look like something either is, let's say, or it isn't. All right? So when I point to this thing, let's say, okay, this thing here is a dog thing. Well, I guess I should keep watching. It's a dog thing. All right? When I point to this thing, I identify this thing. I've now divided the world into two. Dog and not dog. All right? So when I point to this thing, this dog, all right, everything else other than this is not a dog. But I might find other kinds of things in this big world of not dog. I might find people, trees, rabbits, lizards, all kinds of things in this world that are not dog, right? So we have, in order to identify something, we need something to distinguish it from. So it's either a dog or it's not a dog. All right? We say, okay, one further clarification. If I'm going to do this work for you, mine would say, okay, look, we need the law of non-contradiction. Which says something like, okay, look, a thing that we identify cannot be or not be at the same time in the same sense. If it's a dog, then it cannot also not be a dog at the same time in the same sense. Or else, if a dog can be not a dog, then you can't find the dog. The dog kind of goes away, doesn't it? So, in order to be able to have a discriminating world that made up of lots of different kinds of particular things and entities, all right, these are certain kinds of guidelines that the mind must impose upon the nature of things, upon the nature of reality. And it's a wonderful model from the standpoint of creating a certain sort of world that we can, of a certain kind of clarity. All right? Now, so in looking at this model then, you might say, okay, when we put a lot of these things together, then maybe we come out with something like a picture of the world. All right? This is kind of represented here by, this is supposed to be a kind of picture made up of lots of different pieces, which I call the puzzle of life. So from that standpoint, we say, all right, if, for example, you get a knock on your door one day, and you open the door, and a person is standing there, and has this big box that's a puzzle. And it says 500,000 pieces. Hands it to you and says, welcome to your life, happy birthday. Well, that's a bit overwhelming on your birthday. So in a sense, you might say, that's why we send people to school. When we were young, we were in early grades, we were figuring out, well, so why do we have to know these shapes and colors and all this kind of stuff? It's like, you're going to need it later. You don't understand it now. You're a kid. But this stuff all goes together somehow. Just trust me on this. So maybe we learn these things like shapes and colors and so forth and so on. So we've got this thing, and if you have a puzzle, one of the things that we want to do probably is begin to organize. We're not working it, we're preparing for it. Much in a way that you might find, for example, many college students, for example, this isn't their life, they're preparing for life. Right? This is some piece in a puzzle. Right? So in terms of this model, where what's very difficult here is to be present in your life now for real. Right? But rather, what we're doing, we're always sort of planning for the future, because our life is always tomorrow, next week, when we get out of school, when we find our true love, and all these kinds of things, right? And it doesn't have to be true, or it doesn't have to be real. It just has to be something to keep the mind busy, right? So we might say, that when we're putting this puzzle together, we organize it in terms of various kinds of things that we learn in school. So we might say, okay, well, yellow. Okay, yeah, I remember yellow. All right, yellow, I don't know what this thing is, but it's yellow and yellow. So probably, maybe you might put it in a yellow pile. It's like, oh, okay, yellow probably goes with yellow. A yellow what? I don't know a yellow, but yellow goes with yellow. So maybe I'll put it in the yellow pile. So I'll figure out a yellow what, but I think they probably go together somehow. Or maybe I'll do it in terms of shapes, right? I might recognize certain kinds of shapes and say, you know what, this looks kind of like maybe a dog tail. Or a tail of some sort of animal. So maybe I'll organize this in terms of some sort of animal pile. Or some kind of shape or figure or design, because we think those things go together somehow, right? So when we're in the process of putting this puzzle then together, okay, then we might say, all right, look, we now are utilizing our skills, right? In a sense, we're creating our life. Now, let's suppose that we reach a point in our life where it's not working. I'm using my skills, but I'm stumped. It's like the moment when you wake up and it's like, I have this intense pain in my chest. I'm not a physician. I don't know. Is it serious? Is it bad? I don't know. Maybe I should go talk to somebody that does like hearts. Because you see, we have people that specialize in this thing. They specialize in little pieces, little small areas of the puzzle. There are people that do nothing but feet. They study feet. And it's like, okay, I don't know a lot about feet. But if I've got a problem with my feet, maybe I'll go to somebody that knows stuff about that. So you say, okay, look, I figured this out. I don't know how this fits, what goes together. And so I get some help from the specialist. It's like, thanks, okay. And you're back on the road again. Right? So things began to fit together again. So if you imagine that we have lots of people along the way to help us to be able to figure out things that we can't figure out on our own. Now, my question always is, when I'm creating this pile, I'm thinking, because it's my story, I think I'm thinking this way, but I'm thinking one of those piles should be the philosopher's pile. And a philosopher's pile might be the pile that's like, who knows? It doesn't look like anything familiar. It might be what we would call a miscellaneous pile or something like that. So we just throw it in there. But if you're working on a puzzle, when do you go to that kind of pile? When do you go to that pile? I raise this question from the standpoint of asking this in terms of at what point you can wake up and you can say, look, I don't know, I have this intense pain in my chest and it won't go away. And maybe I should go see a doctor. I'll say, well, look, is there really anybody, your family, your friends, anybody close by you that say, are you crazy? A doctor? People wouldn't think you were a bit strange, would they? Because doctors know stuff about this. But you might say, look, I don't know, I just can't seem to figure things out, and I don't know, I feel like maybe I'm depressed, and so forth and so on. Maybe I might say, maybe I should just go see maybe a therapist, a counselor. Somebody might say, well, that's like strange or goofy. Although we do have problems with that, I think, in our culture still. So there are still people probably that would say, ooh, we understand if you have problems with your body, it makes sense, but you have problems with your mind, you're talking about this stuff, and that worries us. So I'm not so sure we're terribly okay with that. But that notwithstanding, I would say that we might be able to at least sell that one. But you can't imagine easily in your experiences when you might wake up and say, look, I just can't really seem to figure things out. Nothing seems to be working. I've tried this, I've tried that, I've tried these specialists, I've tried what they've said, and nothing is working. I think maybe I should talk to a philosopher. I mean, you could probably even look through the yellow pages if you did decide that, and you probably wouldn't come up empty. Why would we say, why would we think, well, why would it never occur to our mind that we would need to talk to a philosopher? And I'm thinking, because they don't know anything. They don't know anything. What do philosophers know? would you turn there? The whole history of philosophy. Even the philosophers can't agree. That wouldn't be much help. One day, Joe wakes up in his life and he realizes that, I don't know, nothing else seems to be working, so he decides to go to the philosopher. And he goes and he talks to the philosopher and he starts telling about his life. And he had reached this point where, look, I try. I was always taught that if you try really hard, then you could expect X, Y, or Z. And I tried really hard. But it seems like no matter how hard I try, I can't figure it out. And I don't know what else to do but to try hard. And the philosopher tells him a story about a man who had worked in a warehouse. He was just the average kind of guy. He had a wife and 5 kids. He loved his wife. He loved his family. He took care of his wife and his family and his kids. He worked in the warehouse. He drove a forklift. It happened to be one night. Things were extraordinarily busy. That happens sometimes, you know. And when he had lifted a skid of puzzles, and he turned the corner in the warehouse, and he turned it just a little bit too sharply, and he caught the skid on the corner of the stack of puzzles. And he flipped the skid, and boxes burst open, and there are puzzle pieces all over the warehouse. And this is a terrible moment. It's a terrible moment because you can't mess with people's lives that way. And they had a lot of deliveries that were due that morning. You ever seen a woman in labor? They're kind of impatient. They want the delivery. He can't tell his boss because his boss would fire him instantly. He needs this job. His fellow workers say to him, look, don't tell the boss. He will fire you. We will stop what we're doing and we will count out 500,000 pieces and throw them in a box. 500,000 pieces, throw them in a box. 500,000 pieces and we'll throw them in a box. And you get the knock at your door. Happy birthday, welcome to your life. We wouldn't typically fault anyone. If you went to the store and you bought a puzzle, and maybe if you're one of the more anal types, you say, okay, look, let me count and make sure I've got all the pieces. So you count them out. You say, okay, all the pieces are there. Because you really wouldn't want to get to the end and find out there's one piece missing. Right? Well, one would particularly fault us for thinking that we have everything we need. All we need to do is to figure out how everything fits together. Philosophers tell goofy stories when our life becomes goofy. And that's why we don't tell the story at the beginning. Because no one would understand it. He shares with them a moment when a man that he had known, he had grown up as a young boy. And his father had always told him, don't ever go to the neighbors. These people are bad people. They're not even of the same race that we are. I don't ever want you to go over there. I don't ever want to see you in their yard because these are bad people. Now we learn a lot of things from our parents at an early age. And so he listened to his father. He tried to be a good son. And so he had grown up. He never did disobey his father. He's an adult now in his life. And one day he wakes up and he finds that, I don't know, things are just not going well in his life. And he doesn't even know why. But for some reason, he just starts thinking about this man, this neighbor, that he doesn't even know, that he's never even met. And yet he thinks he knows who this person is. I don't know, curiosity, wonder, who knows? Plato said philosophy begins in wonder. He goes over to the man's house. He knocks on his door, and he comes to the door, and he's very cordial, and he invites him in. He sits down on the couch, and they begin to talk, and he talks about how his life just seems like this puzzle that just seems, despite whatever he tries, things just don't seem to fit. And he just doesn't know what else to do to make it work. The neighbor looks at him, he said, "It's kind of funny that you say that." And as he said that, he reached over and a drawer beside him, and he picks out this puzzle piece. He said, "You see this? My dad gave it to me. I don't know what it goes to. You know why I kept it? I kept it just because my dad gave it to me. That's all." You see, his dad had told him the same story about the neighbor. And he held on to the piece, but he didn't know why. He said, "You know what? I really have no use for it. But you're welcome to it, if you can use it." And so he gives him the piece. And the man goes back home, and he discovers that this was the piece that was missing. That is unfamiliar mind. That is the mind of philosophy. It is the awakening of the unfamiliar mind. But it doesn't tend to arise, right? We don't tend to become aware of that sort of thing until we reach the point where our life becomes unfamiliar. We never question what we're doing as long as what we're doing works. So if you're working a puzzle and what you're doing is working, the pieces fit, there's no reason to question what it is you're doing. At what point does it arise that we begin to ask deep questions which will take us far beyond our familiar beliefs, our knowledge, the things that mom and dad told us, and so forth and so on. And we realize that this whole thing was a dream. That question I'll leave you with and say, look, what is it that causes people to wake up? What is it that causes people to wake up? Christopher said I should leave you with one of my Kenneth Cohen's, and so here it is. When you see what you see, what are you missing?